Chapter 1, Dhiraj. Dhiraj knew the rain stopped this distance from the coast, but it still made him uneasy. It wasn't natural to be without the rain. He grunted a command to the navigation of his seine skiff, the Lion's Mane, to slow down, and the throttle obediently clanked down to a low rumble, slowing the boat to a crawl. "Come on, babies," he said, peering over the dark ocean waves. "I need a good catch tonight." The thought tightened his throat. He needed this badly now. The prospect of telling his family about another crappy haul made him grit his teeth and focus. Even in the wheelhouse, he was soaked, and he wiped the greasy sleeve of his raincoat across his face. Darkness turned its garish yellow into mustard. Once the boat halted, he called to the floodlights, which swung portside and bathed the water in electric moonlight. As he stepped outside of the wheelhouse, the North Sea's cold whip lashed his face, taking the breath from him. But he bore it, looking upon the horizon. Even under the floodlight, he couldn't see the purse seine net, but he imagined it swelling with bounty just beneath the surface. He smiled in spite of the cold. No, because of the cold. Cold brought them swarming. Just a little luck, and he'd be bringing a bumper harvest home tonight. He clenched his fists in anticipation as he traversed the deck. The rope bobbing on the sea, almost invisible in this blinding blackness, marked his offshore empire. He hoped upon hope that tonight it wouldn't be a fallow one. He headed aft and threw his weight behind the power block lever, cranking it into life. Somewhere out of sight it wheezed and creaked, dragging the chain back inside the hull, closing the dragnet. Odd spots of rain floated in the air, reassuring him of the shoreline's presence somewhere beyond his eye line. It was a few minutes before the bounty began to show. Dhiraj grinned. Not everyone could see the little beauties at first, but his was a trained eye. The slightest trace of a tiny light blue shadow quivered below the water's break. And then another. Soon hundreds, then thousands of the little jellyfish shadows throbbed ever so gently with the thrum and swim of the current, and he laughed, clapping his hands in a jubilant jig. "Yes," he cried to the jellyfish, "I'll be sending you to a very loving home tonight." Still smiling, he called to the power block to stop winding up the dragnet, leaving the group of jellyfish bobbing up and down agreeably, like a gigantic Christmas bauble. All his. Back in the wheelhouse, he started telling the navigation system to head for port, when he took another glimpse at the taut dragnet under light. His smile wilted. Shit. A crumpled piece of plastic poked above the waterline, caught by the net. Could be a plastic bag. Murderous bloody things, he thought. He instinctively placed his hand to his side, where the stinging scars riddled his ribs. Bound to be something poisonous in it with my luck. He punched the console and threw the throttle back into neutral with his hands. Nothing for it. It'd have to be dragged out by hand, in case it contained anything hazardous. Any contaminant and the whole catch would be worthless, and that would be another night wasted. Once on deck, he released the dragnet tab, slid the stepladder along the gonwale, grabbed a pole hook and climbed over. The sea splashed around his ankles, and the blue shadows lapped at his thick black boots like pet dogs. He reached out, straining, hooked the bag. He yanked it towards him, but its weight almost hauled him into the water instead. Bloody hell. If there was one thing worse than a plastic bag, it was a full plastic bag. God knows what was in it. Cursing anew, he hooked his elbow around the stepladder rung for greater stability and reached again. This time he gave it a firm pull with the hook, and the little finger of material started to rotate and rise to the surface. First a small, crinkly triangle, then bigger. Not a disposable plastic bag, thicker than that. A vacuum-packed bag, large, getting larger as the material bobbed to the surface, pulling the blue moon jellies out of the way, eager to break the surface. He saw something white and translucent inside, difficult to discern against the waves and jellies, but then it spun about quickly, catching the glare of the floodlight. When a face emerged from the water trapped in the plastic, Dhiraj cried so loudly he shocked himself, grabbing the ladder tightly with both hands and dropping the pole in the water with a limp splash. He was shivering, and his eyes were blurred with water. He pressed his forehead to the freezing cold of the Lion Mane's hull and closed his eyes. When he opened them, he turned his head to the water and breathed slowly, trying to slow his heartbeat. Shit. The body was still there, serene and ghostly over the bioluminescence of the moon jellies, partially obscured by the glare of the floodlight bouncing off the plastic wrapping. His breathing had calmed now. He hadn't seen a dead body since his Aunt Kiri's funeral. But back then, the sullen teenager in him had been repulsed by the rituals, the flowers, the incense, his aunt's puffy body, shiny with exuberantly applied makeup, and the whole damn need to structure something so profound with grief. He didn't feel that way now. To his great surprise, he found himself muttering, "Supreme light, lead us from truth to untruth, from darkness to light, and from death to immortality." He probably hadn't said the words since that very funeral, as Aunt Kiri was consumed by the crematorium's fire. But Aunt Kiri had died of a heart attack, too much ghee and whiskey. Whereas who could say what had happened to this poor wretch, wrapped up in plastic and dumped in the sea? The wrongness of it all hit him about the head like a jackhammer over and over. Dhiraj shook the whys and wherefores away. He couldn't think about how it had got there or who might be responsible. That wasn't his problem. His job was to fish it out and hope his catch wasn't too contaminated. The body had rolled onto its front, its nakedness obvious yet indistinct. He stepped down into the water, picked up the pole, and reached across to the body. His hands still trembled, but he mastered his apprehension, and after a few attempts the body was within touching distance. As he pulled it close and lifted the head out of the water, his distaste lessened somewhat. A woman. Her face was calm, peaceful even. She didn't look distressed, or as though she had suffered any violence, almost looked asleep, melting Dhiraj's fears away. But when she opened her eyes, Dhiraj screamed, lost his grip, and the sea greeted him with an icy kiss. Nita. African light and heat blasted Nita as she stepped out of the sterile, stuffy aircraft and descended the air stair. The sun, a blistering holy beacon forcing itself upon the land, assailed her for the first time in years. She shielded her eyes, deferential, suddenly aware of her strange new surroundings. Shockingly deep waves of viridian swept across the horizon, miles of trees sprouting violently, surging upwards to soak up the gift that was sunlight. Her skin itched and jaw sagged at the exposure. It was terribly strange not to have an umbrella got up, and it took her a couple of moments dithering to get used to the sensation of the sun prickling her skin and pulling it taut like a lover coaxing her back under the sheets. As she walked towards the terminal, she pulled off her jacket, smiling broadly. She placed her sunglasses on, feeling like a Hollywood superstar. Doubts had abounded throughout the days leading up to the flight, and even during the flight itself, but with the sun planting shocking kisses upon her face, it somehow seemed worth it. She was on top of the world, and she was going to do a hell of a lot of good while she was up there. Travelling alone had been a good idea. Rob, being CEO, had wanted to travel with her so that he could be there for the grand opening of the tech demo, to which the press had been invited, but she'd insisted on travelling by herself. "I need to get used to the surroundings and just take some time to think. This is life-changing. A bit of one's own company would be quite desirable about now," she told him. And he'd agreed. Why would he not? He was a #1 fan right now, and she'd bagged a $1 billion R&D technology demonstrator and a buyer rolled into one, as well as roping in the regulator to open up the lucrative English, and therefore international, markets. He'd already had the marketing brainwave of moving away from the seedy underground connotations of the phrase sex industry by coining the term companionship market. Clever guy. She knew the tech, but when it came to commercialization and telling a story, he knew what to say, and there it was. Best of all, he was right. Emotional interaction was a game changer. During the flight, she had absorbed a ream of human interest stories about women who'd been sexually assaulted, rape victims. It made her shudder. Regardless of what Sir Ingham had said all those weeks ago, they were real women, real human beings, flesh and blood, who suffered. And the men, wretched bastards who committed unthinkable acts for the want of traumatic relationships, humiliation. This was no course for the human race to set itself on. She might have done something unspeakable herself. Might have done, she reminded herself. But she set her jaw as she reasserted what she knew, that she was writing the course. Companionship. It would save countless women, and men too. There would be no losers. Never had she felt such force of conviction behind what she was doing. and by the time she'd coasted through the terminal, she had a slight sweat on and it felt good. The terminal was a slick monument to JPC's grip over the local economy. A crystalline jewel with an awe-inspiring panoramic roof of a single sheet of curved glass that stretched the entirety of the terminal building, allowing passengers to glimpse into the thick rainforest sloping up and away. Nita had read or heard somewhere that this used to be one of the worst airports in the world. It was a far cry from that now, thanks to JCP's oil well. And with JPC now investing in EI systems, it was clear to see that the oil well was being used as a tremendous force for good. In the arrivals hall, a smartly suited, peppery chauffeur named Gregory greeted her with a bespectacled smile, which went some way to counterbalancing the two fearsome-looking soldiers flanking him dressed in jungle fatigues, scruffy machine guns hanging around their shoulders. Security was a major issue here, according to Adam. She and the chauffeur had separately been assigned encrypting codes which recognised each other, validating the identity of the other. Everything went smoothly. Gregory drove her in a heavy, luxurious black limousine, so thick and dumpy and heavy she thought it must have weighed close to 3 tons. The car was the filling in a pickup truck sandwich. One at the front carrying the 2 soldiers from the airport who sat on the back of the truck fingering their guns and scrutinising the landscape with hard-bitten vigilance, their eyes thinned by the sun. Behind her, out of view, another truck carried another couple of similarly armed soldiers. Nita assumed Gregory's car had autonomous drive, but if it did, the driver wasn't interested in using it. From behind the dividing pane of glass, she could see him using the steering wheel, flicking the stick through the gears with well-practiced hands. He'd probably been doing this for years. Weird to see someone driving a car manually. Lines of scrubby palm trees passed by the roadside on the way south. Kids played football on balding pitches, whilst people bickered and laughed and smoked and walked and bathed beneath the sun, earning wrinkles with grins. Air conditioning prevented the sickly humidity from getting in, but she soon found she wanted to feel the heat and commanded the windows to turn down. They didn't. No surprise, really. It looked like a very old car. She pressed the switch, but that did nothing, as if it were merely decorative. "Not a good idea to wind the window down," came Gregory's voice, high and lilting over the intercom. "Why not?" "Press the red button." "What?" "I can't hear you, Miss Rhodes. Press the red button by you to speak." Really? A button-operated intercom? Surely JPC, with all its untold oil wealth, could afford slightly more advanced cars than this? She pressed the button with a sigh. "Why isn't it a good idea to open the window?" Gregory laughed, a high-pitched titter of enjoyment, which mildly irritated her. "Bad folks out there." That's probably all I've got time for.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.